Welcome to Look Ahead Radio with Tom Arms and Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints around the world here on the talk station FM 107 AM 1240. It's every Wednesday afternoon we get the opportunity to talk with our reporter in the world, or if you will, in the field, and of course that being Tom Arms. He is also the editor of LookAheadNews.com and of course Look Ahead Radio. And every Friday afternoon we like talking with Tom to find out what's the world events and how they are, well, how they're moving and what we can expect in the week ahead. That's the reason for the name Look Ahead, Look Ahead Radio and Look Ahead News. As always, to remind you, you're listening to a very special program. This portion, of course, has been pre-recorded to accommodate both my travel plans as well as those of our editor, Tom Arms. And with that, Tom, good afternoon, or actually good evening for you. Good evening to you.
It's just evening now, just starting to go into the gloaming, the dusk, if you like.
Well, I've got several quick questions to ask you. First, the weather, what's it like in London?
Oh, well, it's been changeable. One day it's bright and sunny, and the next day it's wet and miserable.
But is this typical weather for London? I don't think there is such a thing as typical weather for London, which is why weather is such a good topic of conversation. It is always changing. That's like politics, as a matter of fact. And speaking of changing, in the States, we now have daylight savings upon us, and I'm just curious, do the Brits like to save daylight?
I think they like the summer. They like it when it doesn't get so dark late at night. It depends. If you're a farmer, you really, are very fond of it in the winter, not so fond of it in the summer. I think that, because we're so much further north up here, that if we can have a little bit more time in the evenings, in the springtime, it brightens things up a bit.
So do you have daylight savings there? Do you actually move your clocks?
Yes, it starts the end of this month.
Okay. In the States, of course, it starts the first of the month. Well, actually, the end of this month as well. But
So what time is it now?
Our time, it is a little after noon.
Oh, okay.
So, and I assume it's a little after 5 p.m. your time?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. All right. Well, we've settled that issue for the day. Let's look forward to other events. And, we can also look back at the past events of the past week. Something that is resonating here in the States right now, Tom, and that is the topic of WikiLeaks and discoveries that CIA has all sorts of talents and technical ability to, if you will, maintain surveillance of the entire population, not only of this country, but apparently even the world. And I'm wondering how that is resonating there in the UK and in Europe. Well,
it's certainly being reported here, but it's not on the front pages in the same way as I think it is in the States. Mm-hmm. It's certainly down the news bulletins on television and radio and on the inside pages in the newspapers. I think people have probably overdosed on Julian Assange's WikiLeaks. And, like everything, it's had its day. People almost expect it now of organizations like the National Security Agency, the CIA, GCHQ, MI5, MI6. They've got the ability, they're going to use it.
That's interesting. And of course, we've had the experiences with the NSA and Eric Snowden informing folks that the NSA was maintaining surveillance of European leaders, world leaders, not just European. Is that now that there were some hurt feelings, if you will, and some questions associated with that? Is that sort of now passé? It's old news?
Yes, exactly. I think it's in the past. Obama had to rebuild some bridges there, especially with the German chancellor. But I think it's sort of in the past. Obviously, it always that sort of thing leaves a bad taste, and it's dragged up every now and then. But it's certainly not referred to much.
Since you brought up President Obama and we're talking about leaks and, if you will, surveillance, let's talk here momentarily about President Trump's concerns or claims that his phones were tapped while he was in the process of both running for office as well as during that time frame after he was elected by former President Barack Obama. What's the news on that?
Well, I think they probably a lot of people are saying, prove it. He hasn't produced any evidence of any kind. He's just produced speculation. And I think that is what people are saying over here. And they think it's basically trying to deflect people's attention away from the investigation into connections with Russia. That's how it's being reported.
All right. And by the way, related to those connections with Russia, what's the feeling? Is that of concern in Europe?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, they think that the thought of, if Trump had accepted help from Russia to win the presidential election, surely, I would have thought that was verging on the illegal, almost treasonous. I don't know. I don't know what American law is on that.
Well, I'm just curious.
But I would have thought it would call his administration into question.
But what about the opinion? Because obviously, scandal is nothing unique to American politics or even the threat of it. Is there a feeling that the European community is feeling left out, or are they just taking a sort of a jaundiced view of what's happening here right now in relationship to those accusations?
No, because they know that the Russians are hacking into their computers as well. Okay. There's lots of evidence of Russia trying to influence the political process here in Europe. They know they're not alone. The question, that's not the question as far as President Trump is concerned. The question is whether or not the Trump team used the information that might have been gathered by the Russians in hacking into the DNC computers to their advantage. Whether they sought it out, whether there were connections between the Russian government and the Trump team. Everyone's used to the Russians doing this sort of thing. Nobody likes it, and they all complain about it. And the Russians deny it vehemently, but then they would.
Well, you would expect. All right. Before we wrap things up in this first segment with, of course, our foreign editor, Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com, and as well as Look Ahead Radio. And by the way, just to remind you, Look Ahead Radio heard every Friday on this station and, of course, stations around the world. One other quick note related to the presidential issues here in the U.S., new travel directives. How is that being reported in Europe and around the world?
Well, it's being reported as he's doing a better job of it the second time around. It's not quite so, as we would say over here, shambolic. However, it's still viewed over here as a travel ban against Muslims, not just against specific countries. I think this is because of the connection people make between the speeches during the campaign and the actions that are being taken after Trump has taken office. And as such, as a directive, a travel directive against Muslims, then it must fall foul of the freedom of religion clause in the Constitution.
Well, it's really aimed at countries not which happen to have a significant Muslim population, significant, not necessarily total, but it's aimed at 7 countries, but that we'll not parse that today. Tom, I want to move on to this related issue here in just a few moments, and of course the role of immigration and issues associated with the asylum seekers in Europe, but predominantly associated with the economies of Europe. And we'll do that in just a moment. Just to remind folks, we have joining us this afternoon, every Wednesday afternoon at this time, as a matter of fact, Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com. And by the way, you can yourself become a reader of that blog by just going to the website, LookAheadNews.com, and of course, at Look Ahead Radio. You're listening, of course, to Viewpoints Around the World with Tom Arms, here on the talk station FM 107 AM 1240.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment.
This is Tom Arms with LookAheadNews.com's expanded world analysis for the week beginning the 13th of March. LookAhead broadcasts tomorrow's news today so that you can plan to participate. Version 2 of President Trump's travel ban takes effect next Wednesday if the federal court in Hawaii doesn't block it. State authorities are opposing it on the grounds that the ban breaches religious freedom rights and damages the state economy. Donald Trump, meanwhile, plays host to Irish Prime Minister Edna Kerry, who's in America for St. Patrick's Day on Friday. He will also see German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who's been diplomatically critical of the president's policies on human rights, immigration, NATO, Brexit, and the EU. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is on a Far Eastern tour next week to discuss North Korean missile tests. He will be in Japan on Wednesday and Thursday, South Korea on Friday, and China on Saturday. In each country he'll meet his counterpart, and in China he's expected to also meet President Xi Jinping. In Beijing, Mr. Tillerson will also try to repair damaged Sino-American bridges while stressing America's position on the South China Sea and East China Sea. G20 finance ministers meet in Baden in Germany next Friday and Saturday. Earlier in the week, the new U.S. Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin, is in Berlin on Wednesday and Thursday for talks with his German counterpart, Wolfgang Schäuble. The OECD on Tuesday launches its annual report for the G20 countries. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Federal Reserve Bank has its monthly meeting on Tuesday and Wednesday. Chairman Janet Yellen has hinted at interest rate rises. Also next week, President Trump will deliver to Congress the budget for financial year 2018. In Britain, the Brexit bill returns to the House of Commons after the Lords attached amendments protecting the rights of EU citizens and insisting on a substantive parliamentary vote on any negotiated deal. The government of Theresa May has said it would throw out the amendments. Meanwhile, Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson flies to Moscow for talks on Syria and Ukraine, issues over which the Foreign Office said Britain and Russia have significant differences. In the Netherlands, far-right populist Geert Wilders is expected to win the most seats, but not an outright majority in parliamentary elections there. Wilders wants to stop all Muslim immigration, ban mosques, and has called Islam an ideology from a retarded culture. In France, Republican presidential candidate François Fillon appears in court on charges related to the payment of $1 million of public money for work which his wife allegedly did not do. Fillon has vowed to continue his campaign despite the scandal. And that was next week's News Today from LookAheadNews.com. Stay tuned for Viewpoints Around the World with myself and Lockwood Phillips.
Welcome back to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints around the world this afternoon, actually this evening with Tom Arms. Just to remind you, this portion has been pre-recorded due to his schedule as well as mine, but also got to make mention of the fact that we're moving to a recorded time slot because we've been talking at midnight Tom's time, and I think it's nice to give him some beauty sleep, which I think he's desperately in need of, but that's another story. Tom, I do appreciate you staying with us. Let's
look in the mirror.
I do every day, and I'm very impressed by it. But anyhow, let's talk here about the issues associated with the economies in Europe, particularly with Brexit. What's happening? The House of Lords, there's going to be apparently some negotiations. What are we talking about?
Well, what's happened is the House of Lords has passed 2 amendments to the Brexit bill, neither of which the government likes, and they're going to try and overturn them in the Commons. But it does give support to those people, those parliamentarians in the Commons, to rebel against the government. Now, one of them, the first one, which they passed last week, says that EU citizens, and there are 3 million of them, EU citizens in the UK will continue to have the right to live here. That is, those people who are members of the EU now and are living in the UK now and will be living in the UK at the time of Britain's formal departure will continue to have the right of residence in the UK. Mm-hmm. Now, this was Mrs. May was holding this in reserve. She was using these people basically as a bargaining chip because there's another 2 or 3 million Britons living in Europe. And what she's saying is, I don't want to give the right of abode to 3 million people in the UK unless the EU gives right of abode to 2 or 3 million Britons living in Europe. Now, a lot of people say, well, this isn't fair to the 3 million and we should take the initiative. The other one is Parliament having a substantive vote on the issue of leaving the European Union when the details of the negotiation are completed.
I find that interesting that I thought the vote was done.
Well, the vote was done on the principle. The vote was done on the principle.
Okay.
And Mrs. May promised another vote, but the vote would simply be a vote by Parliament on yes or no. Either you accept what she's negotiated or you reject it. And if you reject it, we have no deal, but we leave the EU anyway.
Wow.
So, that's pretty much a fait accompli. There are a lot of details that need to be sorted out. As they say, the devil is in the details.
There's no question.
And a lot of people are worried that they've given a blank check to the Prime Minister to negotiate a deal and no say on what she actually does. It's a bit like, any treaty in Congress or any treaty in the United States has to be approved by Congress.
I find this interesting because obviously Brexit, frankly, is kind of old news, but it has so many twists and turns. And of course, we're going to get into this in a few moments about the impact this has on upcoming elections in France and Ireland, and also, I might add, Netherlands and Germany. So there's so many twists and turns. Let's stay with the EU for just a few more moments here with you. Tom Arms, again, of LookAheadNews.com and LookAhead Radio. Multi-speed EU agreement? What is this?
Oh, this is very interesting. There's a meeting on Monday between the presidents and prime ministers of Germany, France, Spain, and Italy. And the idea was to come up with EU reforms in preparation for the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome, which founded the European Economic Community. And that's going to be on the 25th of March. And basically what they've come up with is a proposal to introduce a two-speed or two-tier Europe, so that those people or those countries which don't want to move towards European Union as fast as the others, or not as economically advanced, can approach it a lot more slowly. And they're going to present this to a heads of government meeting on Thursday and Friday, to the other 27 heads of government. If they'd done this years ago, instead of fighting against it, you might not be having Brexit. You might not be having the problems in Italy and Greece that you're having economically. And so I think it's a bit of a cock-up, to be quite honest.
No, why do you say that? I mean, is this a situation that is too late to solve, is what you're saying?
I think it's closing or bolting the stable door after the horse is bolted a bit.
Yeah.
Britain has left Brexit. These are things that Britain was arguing for. And the Germans and the French were saying, oh, no, we've all got to go together.
And of course, you've got the overall economy of Europe under stress as a result. All right, let's move on to one other quick item here related really to the United Kingdom before we move over to the continent. Northern Ireland, you've got some elections there.
We've had some elections there. Mm-hmm. And the most interesting thing is that Sinn Féin, the nationalist group, which used to be affiliated to the IRA, was the political arm of the IRA, is now just behind the Unionist Party, that is the Protestant Party, in the government in Northern Ireland. They are literally almost neck and neck in the what's called the Stormont, which is the national parliament for Northern Ireland, or the regional parliament.
Right.
Now, no one ever thought this would happen because the Protestants have usually been 2/3 of the population. But the fact is that the Catholics are catching up. And this could create huge problems in the future because the Protestants, backed into a corner, can be just as violent as the IRA was.
Well, the other aspect of it is the IRA was an outlawed organization by the United Kingdom. What is the future of the IRA and Sinn Féin?
Well, the IRA is no longer any part of Sinn Féin. The IRA is just a shadow of its former self. There are a few cells left, but basically they're not a serious problem. I think the bigger problems are, what happens if the nationalists eventually win a majority in the Stormont and say, we're going to use our power, our majority, to vote in favor of union with Southern Ireland.
And of course, related to this is the role that Ireland may play in the issue of the European Union.
Absolutely. They're in a really difficult position because most of their trade, something like 3/4 of their trade or more, is with the UK. Mm-hmm. But they are members of the European Union, and they get a lot of money from the European Union for development and research and science and technology and things. And they're part of the euro, and they're doing very well as economically being part of the EU. But if they are sharing the same island and they're not members of the EU, that will economically close the border between North and South.
That's that smacks of the same situation between Scotland and the rest of Great Britain, because similar situation. We'll get back to that in just a moment. You're listening to Tom Arms, editor of LookAheadNews.com, and of course also heard every week here on the talk station and radio stations around the world at Look Ahead Radio.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment. We now return to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints around the world this afternoon with Tom Arms. This portion of the program has been pre-recorded. Tom, we were just chatting a few moments ago about the events in Northern Ireland and the problem that we're seeing with a major political disruption there. And I mentioned the EU because that is really the topic that still weighs heavily on the whole political and economic situation there in Europe with the United Kingdom's decision to leave the EU. Northern Ireland, major changes there. They're not quite related, but Northern Ireland's relationship with the EU and the United Kingdom, as well as Scotland's relationship with the European Union and the United Kingdom. Is it possible, and is that a concern in the United Kingdom, that they may lose two major, what would you call them now? They're part of the country, but they are colonies. Well, not colonies, but...
No, they're not colonies. Devolved areas, shall we say, or regions.
Regions.
Yes, it's very much a concern.
Okay.
And there was a conference of the Scottish Conservative Party last week at which Theresa May was addressing this concern. And she's already campaigning against having another referendum in Scotland on independence. And the Scottish Nationalist Party is campaigning to have one. All the polls indicate that if they did have another referendum in Scotland, that they would lose the Independence Party, Scottish Nationalist Party, would lose even bigger than they did before. And the reason is because the price of oil is dropping and North Sea oil is starting to dry up. So they need that support from the United Kingdom.
A lot of people are not aware of the fact that there is such a large oil production capacity off Scotland, off the Shetland Islands, and in fact, North Sea oil is a key player in the economy, not only there in the United Kingdom but worldwide. All right, let's move from that point to other elections. We've got several elections: French elections, the Dutch elections, and of course Hong Kong. We'll get to that a little later on and what's happening there, particularly in the Orient. But let's talk about the issues in the continent, French and Dutch elections. And I also want to bring up the German elections, but let's start with the French elections. Again, populist movement happening across Europe. What is the future of the populist effort?
Well, it's still, I don't think, Marine Le Pen has gotten any more. In Holland, we'll come back to France, but in Holland, I think that That is going to be next week, the Dutch elections. And Geert Wilders, who's leader of the Freedom Party there, is likely to win the biggest slice of parliament, but not enough to form a government. Now, Wilders is much more conservative than Donald Trump. Trump wants to stop Muslim immigration from half a dozen countries. Mm-hmm. Wilders wants to ban it altogether. Trump wants to introduce surveillance on mosques. Wilders wants to ban them altogether. No mosques in the Netherlands. In fact, he says he wants to eradicate not Islamic jihadism, but Islam. Okay?
And how is that selling with his with the general population of Holland?
He's doing all right.
Wow.
Now, the reason is because a lot of people say that he's incredibly intelligent. They don't necessarily a lot of people don't like his policies, but they like the personality. He's quite charismatic. Mm-hmm. He is a fantastic orator. And when he speaks, he doesn't come over as an extremist, snarling and beating his fist and things like that. In fact, a lot of people mistakenly believe he's a bit liberal when he's not. So because of this persona, he's able to draw in, and he's a very personable person, he's able to draw in a lot of the floating voters, which is why he's doing well. Having said that, they don't like the Moroccan immigrants,
right,
in the Netherlands.
Well, I've heard that from folks in Sweden as well. How is this influencing the efforts in Northern Europe, Sweden, Norway, etc.? What influence is this having?
Well, I don't think it's. The Dutch elections are not being billed quite as important, but I think they could be more important if Geert Wilders does very well.
What about the influence on Germany and the German elections? Then I want to get to France.
Germany is different. I don't really believe that the populist right has much of a base in Germany. As I've said, they've got 15% solid. There's always going to be 15, 20% people who are going to be extremists of some kind or another.
Tom, the other question, and just sort of a very quick analysis.
The country's fairly stable economically, you see.
Okay.
So what are they going to rebel against?
All right. And that was the question. What influence? We obviously know that this has had significant influence on immigration and asylum seekers, but it has had also a major influence on the topic of the European Union and those countries that are going to stay in the European Union. At this point, are there any countries other than France that seem to be on the precipice of leaving the European Union as well?
Well, the Netherlands.
Netherlands, definitely. Yep.
Hungary.
Okay.
Czech Republic.
All right. So that being said, should Geert Wilders win, does this cause greater concern for the European Union?
Yes, it does. It's another straw on the EU's back.
Okay.
It's not as, Brexit was more like a pile of bricks. But so it's one brick rather than a pile.
All right.
Brexit has kicked it off.
Let me move on because we're running out of time here in this segment. I want to talk about the French elections because that has been scandal-plagued.
It has been. And I can't see how Fillon is hanging on. But he is. And it really looks as if he's going to be, he was tipped to be number 2 in the first poll and to win the presidency. Everyone was saying, Francois Fillon was going to be the next president. But, he is being charged with corruption and embezzlement from the state. And he refuses to leave the campaign, even though he previously said, if I am charged, I will step down and let someone else take my place.
All right. Now, we jumped right into the middle of that. For some who were not aware of the particulars in France, we have 3 major candidates, and it's going to take at least 2 elections to select the president. My question to you, let's really quickly go through the list of the candidates, the 3 primaries, the 3 primary candidates.
Well, Marine Le Pen from the National Front, she's the far-right candidate. Mm-hmm. Francois Fillon, who is the conservative sort of center-right candidate, if you like. and then Emmanuel Macron, who is the centrist to center-left candidate.
And Macron was really a latecomer to the election. Let's talk about Fillon. His problems are basically a family affair, as it were. He's helped finance his wife's. She was on the payroll, and that was the big scandal.
To the tune of $1 million. Yeah.
Okay, and he has been charged.
Paid his children as well.
Okay, and he's been charged. What's the crime?
Well, basically, fraud. Because he claimed that his wife was working in his office in the National Assembly, and nobody's ever actually seen her there.
Okay. So, all right. Well, maybe she was working, but working, shall we say, distance commuting, something of that nature. All right. Let's talk about Marine Le Pen. You've said from the outset that there was no chance she was going to win. Is there a chance?
Well, of course, there's a chance. I mean, they're having they're having polls, opinion polls all the time, obviously, as they do everywhere else. And there are two opinion polls, and that is who's likely to win the first round and then who's likely to win the second round. Now, let me explain. They have two rounds where basically anyone can put their name on the ballot. Mm-hmm. And then they take the top two from the first round and they have a runoff election 2 weeks later. Now, she is billed to win the first round because she has a solid 30%, maybe a little bit more, of the vote behind her. But it's flatlined at that.
All right, no growth. All right, now the next question, though, is in light of the events happening in the Netherlands, in Germany, might those influence the French election? Because I'm gathering, Tom Arms of Look Ahead News and Look Ahead Radio with us, lookaheadnews.com, that, frankly, the two biggest players in the European Union are France and Germany, other than the UK. If Marine Le Pen does win, and we have Geert Wilders winning in the Netherlands, could that doom the European Union?
Yes, it could.
Okay, it could. We won't get into the details on that. All right, let's talk about Macron. How is he able to build his coalition in light of the fact he was a very latecomer to the campaign?
He wasn't a latecomer to the campaign. He was a latecomer to politics. Okay. He's never held elected office.
Oh, all right.
He was a businessman. He joined the Hollande administration as an economic advisor and very quickly rose to be appointed economic minister.
Okay, so he's held public office though,
for 2 years.
Okay,
only 2 years. He's only 39 years old.
All right. Does he, at this point, is he the dark horse that everybody is looking to?
He's not even a dark horse. He's ahead of Fillon in the polls.
Okay.
And when they do opinion polls of who's likely to win the second round of elections, people, 60% of the population are saying they'd vote for him.
Interesting. All right, we're going to get back to this in just a moment. I just was curious about how this is all sort of wrapping up. We've got Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com with us this afternoon, along with Look Ahead Radio, of course, heard every Friday afternoon here on the talk station, which you're listening to this afternoon, Viewpoints Around the World.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment.
Observations of an Expat by Tom Arms from LookAheadNews.com. There was a massive elephant in the British House of Commons on Wednesday. It was rampaging back and forth across the chamber, overturning tables, loudly trumpeting and waving his trunk from side to side. Its name was Brexit. Chancellor of the Exchequer Philip Hammond did his level best to ignore the distinctly unfriendly pachyderm. In fact, he did not utter the B word once during his 45-minute budget speech. But the Brexit elephant was as plain to see as the Chancellor's traditional red box. Growth forecasts for 2017, said the Chancellor, have been upgraded from 1.4 to 2%. Employment forecasts are rosy, and predictions for government borrowing are down, down, down. The pound remains at rock-bottom levels against the dollar, but the economy has not fallen off the cliff, as some pro-European campaigners said it would do on the 24th of June. But then, Britain is still in the phony war period. Article 50 has not been invoked. Details of the government's negotiating position remain shrouded in mystery. Details of the European Commission negotiating position are a total enigma. The markets, the banks and the investors on whom the British public rely for the paychecks that keep them in food, clothing and shelter are still playing the wait-and-see game. They don't want the expense and bother of uprooting themselves from comfortable London bases, so they're waiting. They're waiting for the end of March when Mrs. May is due to invoke Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty and start the negotiation ball rolling. They're waiting to see just how hard the hardball is that is thrown out by the Commission negotiators and Chancellor Merkel. They're waiting to see just what bribes and enticements Mrs. May will offer foreign businesses to remain in Britain and foreign governments to sign quick trade deals. Philip Hammond is waiting too, and the former Remain campaigner is saving his pennies because he believes that the picture of post-Brexit Britain will be considerably less rosy than that painted by his Brexiteering cabinet colleagues. For that reason, he's being raked over the coals for breaking an ironclad election promise not to raise taxes or national insurance. Instead, he has substantially increased contributions from the growing army of the self-employed, who have no job security, no maternity benefits, no employer pension contributions, and no paid holidays. Social services, the National Health Service, and education, they're all under severe strain after 7 years of austerity budgets. They received some money in the Wednesday budget, but it was the bare minimum, and many would argue that it wasn't even that. The problem, as the Chancellor pointed out, is that Britain has a $2 trillion debt. That is almost $70,000 for every household in the country. And with the uncertainty created by the Brexit elephant, this is not the time, as the Chancellor said, for more unfunded spending in the future. Philip Hammond's budget is not the only thing affected by the uncertainty of the Brexit elephant. The European Union touched almost every aspect of British lives, which, to be honest, was one of the main objections to it. But because of this, 8 months after the referendum, the Brexit elephant continues to cast a huge shadow over the entire country. Because they're British, they bottle it up, stiffen their upper lips, and go about their daily business as if nothing happened on the 23rd of June. But they know that the uncertainty of the Brexit elephant is walking in lockstep right next to them. To use another animal metaphor, Britain is a swan. To the casual onlooker, it is gliding effortlessly along the placid surface, while underneath it is paddling furiously to prevent itself from plunging over the Brexit waterfall.
Welcome back to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints around the world with Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and, of course, Look Ahead Radio as well. Tom, we're talking about elections. Let's talk about the elections in Hong Kong, and then that will allow me to segue into the events in North Korea as well. You have elections in Hong Kong, of course, which is a Chinese, it's an interesting political arrangement there as well. What is the future of the elections in Hong Kong in light of the fact that China considers Hong Kong part of the mainland?
It's called one country, two systems. And Hong Kong is allowed a sort of it's allowed a capitalist system, but it has to be part of China. The elections are going to be elections for a new executive chairman of the Legislative Council on the 26th of March. Now, the way the elections work are that they don't have direct elections. People don't go out and vote for them. They are elected by an election committee of 1,200 people who are the great and good of Hong Kong and largely picked by the Communist Party.
Does it look like this is going to be an election that will be accepted by the general population of Hong Kong, recognizing they have at least come to grips with the fact that China is the power structure?
Well, this is that's exactly the right question. And the candidate that is likely to win, the one who's being tipped, is seen as being not anti-democracy, but she's not seen as a supporter of what's called the pro-democracy movement.
Right.
The person who's seen as a pro-democracy movement is a Mr. Sang, the one whom the Communist Party is appearing to support is a Mrs. Lam,
Right.
Carrie Lam.
Is China in any way sort of softening its approach politically, or is it trying to do more political consolidation?
I think it's trying to do more political consolidation.
And is that how
it's trying to push Hong Kong in particular? And Hong Kong is, if you like, a test case.
Right.
It's trying to push Hong Kong more into the communist straitjacket.
Okay. And with that said, I'm going to move quickly to North Korea before we wrap things up. With that said, how does, again, the European market and particularly the UK see this? Is it really something that's just of interest, or is there grave concern?
Well, there's grave concern because they know that most of the people in Hong Kong don't want to be pushed into the communist straitjacket.
Okay.
And so they might push back. And you're talking about, a city which has a greater GDP than most countries.
Right. And it's been a major player. And of course, that's why China, and I'm emoting here, why China appreciates Hong Kong, because it's really its entry point into the commercial free world, as it were. Let's move quickly to North Korea, and we'll bring it back to the States as well. Concerns associated with the missile testing by the North Koreans, the impact on South Korea, but also the U.S. involvement. Not to get into the details, is there interest in this in Europe and or also concern?
Oh, yes, very concerned. What they're worried about is, and what I think they've always been worried about, is some rogue state or rogue organization being pushed into a corner or just going completely rogue and deciding they want to launch a nuclear attack.
But what about
developing nuclear weapons and attacking it? And that's what you have in North Korea.
But what
and it could so quickly escalate beyond the Korean Peninsula.
Understood. What about the role of China? Is Europe in any way assisting China in trying to ameliorate the problem?
Well, the role of China, it's very interesting. Both China and Russia are saying, they're in one breath putting pressure on North Korea to step down. Recently, for instance, I think it was today, China said to North Korea, if you stop testing missiles, we'll persuade the Americans and South Koreans to stop doing joint military maneuvers.
Right. So
but at the same time, they're complaining to the Americans that things like the missile defense system, which the U.S. has just moved into South Korea, are capable of not only targeting North Korean systems, but also Chinese and Russian systems. And so they're a bit worried about that.
So, again, we're getting into now an arms race, but now on the Korean Peninsula, actually South Korea. All right, wrapping it up with you, Tom. And again, Tom Arms of Viewpoints Around the World and also Viewpoints Radio. I see a little note here. Corruption bus tour in Mexico?
Yeah. Some Mexican entrepreneurs have come up with a clever way of legally exploiting state corruption in Mexico. They've started bus tours of monuments to corruption on what's called the Corruptor Tour. And it goes around, it's an old school bus that goes around Mexico City, pointing out all the buildings which are a result of corruption and things like that, like a Quartz Tower, which cost $100 million to build when it should have been like $10 million.
I can see this making it in other countries as well. Very interesting. Tom Arms, of course, of LookAheadNews.com and also Look Ahead Radio, heard every Friday afternoon here on the talk station and radio stations around the world.
Look Ahead Radio is a production of the Talk Station.